Let's resume this course. I was explaining at the end of the first session this idea that there's no, in the literature it's often said that there are many different particle algorithms, the bootstrap particle filter, the auxiliary particle filter, and they're all different. And the point I'm trying to make here is that there's actually only one algorithm. It's always the same. Of course, there's some little variation. You can change the resampling scheme. I won't have time to describe the different resampling scheme actually, but there exist different resampling scheme. But otherwise, it's always the same algorithm. And what changes is the specification of the Markov kernels MT and this function GT. So let me show you again the algorithm. Again, it's an algorithm which is sequential over time. At every time t, you sample random variables according to kernel MT, and you reweight them according to function GT. If you will decide not to resample the particle at each time, you could turn this algorithm into something very basic, which will be important sampling. You will sample recursively from the kernels MT, and you will reweight according to function GT. So if you think about it, it's pretty obvious that in the end you will sample from this Qt application I told you about. Okay, you can see that from this description. In your mind, you have to remove the resampling step. If you don't resample, then your ancestor is just xt minus 1n, and the weights will have to be updated, right? It will be wtn equal wt minus 1n times gt, and then you will see that your proposal is this, that you sample your states according to this joint distribution. And you will reweight according to this. So that will be the weight function of the change of measure. Okay? And so you will sample from a certain distribution Qt. Okay? Now things are a bit more complicated because I resample every time, and essentially I keep only at any time t the last component, or the latest if you will. All right, but otherwise the idea is the same. And the point I was making just before the end is that in particular, if you make sure that you have this identity where let's use the densities to make it a bit simple, but if you have MT, or using kernels because that's what I wrote on the board. If you match MT xt minus 1 dxt times GT like this with this product, ft yt given xt pt xt minus 1 dxt, okay? So in this Q distribution, each time you find MT and GT, you replace by this. In the end, this Qt dx0t will simply be the distribution of x0t given the data. Okay? So that's the condition I told you about last time. All right? And the specific case where I take MT to be PT and GT to be FT is a bootstrap filter, but it's just one specific choice. You have more generality if you want. If you're a bit confused because I'm writing this in terms of kernels, think of on the left side, on the right side, you have two measures. They may not be probability measure because they are weighted according to a certain function. And if that doesn't really mean much to you, just replace this with densities. So instead you will have GT times MT equals FT PT. So in case you have densities everywhere, I'm just saying this product of function match. Okay? Right. So another question is, you have this increased flexibility, liberty, brought by the fact you don't necessarily take MT to be equal to PT. What's the best you could do? It's always an obvious question you ask. Maybe it's not such a smart question, but it's an obvious question. And then you have this result, which is surprisingly easy to derive, actually. But it's a bit tricky to understand well. Okay, so the question is, you are at time t. The kernels at the times before were already chosen. If you choose the kernel, you automatically choose the function if you want to verify this identity. Okay? So GSMS have been fixed already, and now you want to choose MTGT that still satisfies this condition, and you want to minimize the variance of the weights. So at time t, the weights is just this quantity, okay, before you normalized. And again, it's reasonably easy to show that the kernel that is going to minimize this variance is this guy. So it's the kernel you obtain by taking the kernel of the model, multiplied by the likelihood of the data, and you have to normalize. Because, of course, you want a probability kernel. So for a given xt-1, the integral has to be 1. Okay? Again, in terms of densities, if you add densities, you would simply write mt opt xt given xt-1 is up to a constant pt xt given xt-1 times ft yt given xt. And you will recognize up to a constant this density. This will be the density of xt given xt-1 and yt. Okay? Essentially. So it's easy to interpret as a result. That's what I have on the next slide. This optimal kernel is simply the distribution of xt given xt-1 on yt. Okay? So in a sense, it's a perfect compromise between the information brought by xt-1 and the information brought by the new data point yt. Okay, how to prove this? Just let me give you a hint, and then you can work out as an exercise. You can say that variance of this so maybe call this guy z-t-1 n to make the notation a bit easier. Okay, and this is going to be larger than the variance of the expectation of the same guy. So this time I just put ztn, zt-1n, sorry, xtn, but conditional on zt-1n. Okay, so, and then you can show that, so this is clear that this is larger than this, and then you can check that when you take MT to be this guy, you're going to obtain a weight that depends only on, that does not depend on xtn actually. You see this identity, it says the variability of the weight is larger than the variability of the weight when I remove the randomness of xtn, conditional on the ancestor. And this particular kernel, if you check, you will see that it gives you a weight function that does not depend on xt. So obviously, if it's constant in xt, it has 0 variance, conditional on the ancestor. So that's this result, essentially. Okay. If you remember yesterday or the first lecture you had on important sampling, you have the same kind of result. We present important sampling, and then we say, oh, what is the best proposal? And you get this optimal proposal. And then I said to my students, that's a simple result, but it's actually borderline useless because we're not able to sample from it typically. Okay, so that was a stupid question. We should not ask what is the best proposal within all probability distribution. A better question would be what's the best proposal within the family of Gaussian distribution or the family of distribution which are easy to sample. Unfortunately, this problem is a bit more complicated. So there will not be an easy tractable solution. So the problem here is the same. There is no guarantee that you can sample from this guy. Okay? Sometimes it's trivial. Sometimes it's doable but a bit difficult, and it is going to be better in this case to try to find a kernel which is close to this guy, but which is easy to sample from. Okay? So it's the same logic as in importance sampling. Okay? It's not directly applicable, it just gives you some guideline, okay? So it's mostly indicative. So just to, I mean, for you guys it's kind of obvious, I'm sure, but to my students I emphasize this point. The recommendation is going to use as a kernel an approximation of the optimal kernel, but that does not make your algorithm approximate, or there's no extra level of approximation. It's just that the performance will not be exactly the optimal performance. You get some decreased performance. But you will get a different MT, and set GT like that, and the algorithm will still be correct. You will still target the same QT, which is just the distribution you're interested in. Okay? Okay, so let's make it a bit more concrete by looking at examples. Here I take the Gaussian case. Yt given xt is Gaussian. Everything in dimension 1. Huh? So Yt given xt is Gaussian with mean xt variance sigma y square. And xt given xt minus 1 is normal with variance sigma x square. The mean is a function of xt minus 1. Okay? Let's go back to this point later. So simple exercise really. You can check that the optimal kernel in this case is this Gaussian with a variance such that the inverse of variance is the sum of the inverse of the two variances here. And the mean is some weighted average of h of xt minus 1 on yt. Okay, so it's a basic example. I'm sure you recognize this kind of result based on conjugacy, etc. Most of you are familiar with it. But also it's a good mental image of what you're going to try to do with this guided filter. Okay, you want to sample your particles in such a way that it's a compromise between the prior mean and according to your Markov kernel and the data. Okay, and if sigma y is very small compared to sigma x, you're going to take in you're going to weight yt much more. Okay, and that will be the case where in contrast the bootstrap filter is going to suffer because it's not going to use this part. Okay. And you're going to simulate blindly everywhere, but only a few particles will be compatible with the data. Okay? Right, so why is this function h? Well, if I take a linear function, all this is kind of useless. I could do a particle filter for a linear Gaussian model, but I know I could do Kalman filtering instead, which is exact. Okay? So there's little point in doing that, except if you want to do some toy some numerical experiment based on a toy example. Yet, if you remember my Ricker model yesterday, the model had exactly this structure, except h was nonlinear, and this result applies. So you will see later some plots. I promised to Eric there will be plots today, so I keep my promise. I will plot in particular at some point the log likelihood function of this model. And for this, I could use the perfect guided filter. Okay? So in terms of terminology, I say guided filter whenever I do something more general than bootstrap. And here by perfectly guided, I mean I could use the optimal purpose. Okay? If you don't remember, this Ricker model is, I don't want to go back in the slide because I'm going to get lost, but that you had h of x, which was x plus theta 1 minus 2 theta 2 exp of theta 3 x. Okay, and x was the log of the population size for a certain species like bats or whatever kind of animal you're studying. And without this term, you had this exponential growth up to some point where they become some limitation in terms of resources in the habitat, or something like that. Okay, so for this model, which is found in the literature, you can do the optimal proposal. So otherwise, what people do, it's a bit, so this slide is illustrative with that, but maybe it's not so great. Is the microphone still working? Yes? Can you hear me? Yes? For the stochastic volatility model, you can work out the log density of this optimal kernel. Okay, so if you remember, this part is going to be the log density of xt given xt minus 1 because you have an autoregressive process. And for yt given xt, you have this. It's because yt given xt was normal with variance exponential of xt. So you can check it gives you this. And so you see this log density, it looks a bit like a normal because as a function of xt, everything is a polynomial of order 2 minus this guy. This guy is annoying, it's an exponential, so it's not a polynomial of order 2. So what people do typically is that they Taylor expand this around some x naught. And if you do that, then everything is a polynomial of order 2. So exponential of a polynomial of order 2 give you a Gaussian. So that's the kind of trick people do, and then you have to decide how to choose x naught. And this kind of trick can be traced back to papers by Neal and Shepard in the 90s. In practice, it doesn't help so much for stochastic volatility, so that's the funny thing, but it's another story. Still, I'm ahead. I'm really late compared to what I wanted to do. So if I don't mind, I'm going to skip this example, but it's a bit interesting because it's pathological. I just want to conclude for guided filter. So it's really important to try to do a guided filter whenever you're in a challenging situation. Challenging means typically yt given xt is informative. It can be because the noise level is very small, or also it's the case whenever the dimension of state is high, actually. Then it makes a big difference if you manage to do some kind of guided filter. But it's more work, and you need to be able to compute this density, which is, as I explained yesterday, not something you're always able to do. Okay. So let me quickly, I'm going to skip the APF. I have a big love-hate relationship with the APF, mostly hate actually. But so APF is a further generalization, and everybody in the literature always try to cast everything in terms of the APF. I was not able for the book to find any example where the APF will bring anything relative to the guided filter. And whenever I talk to other people who work on this, I say, oh, no, but this example. But yes, but are you sure that the improvement comes from this extra liberty brought by the APF, or it's just the proposal? And then you check, it's just the proposal. So anyway, I keep it for reference because it might be of useful to some of you, and I skip that because of lack of time, and just showing you. So this is a linear Gaussian example. So it's toy because you could do a Kalman filter. I took sigma y to be 0.2 and sigma x is 1, so slightly informative. And that's, I run the algorithm many times, so the smaller the box plot, the better. So that bootstrap guided APF. So again, here by guided, I mean the optimal one, because you can compute the optimal proposal, and also there's some notion of optimality for APF. And here I use the particle filter to estimate the log likelihood. And you can see the improvement by guided is quite large, and APF it's 0. And the same story for the mean square error over time for expectation of xt, etc. So for stochastic volatility, have a look at the book. There's some crazy thing going on with the APF. So when I said I could not find an example why it works better, I could find an example why it works worse, but that's interesting. Anyway. Okay, so I'm super late, so I'm gonna skip a few chapters, but that's fine. Yeah, let me skip it. I really want to take the time to cover properly SMC samplers as I promised to various people. So let's show a plot to Eric. Where was the plot? Yeah, let me just show you this. So for a stochastic volatility model with 3 parameters, I fix 1 parameter, and this is the log likelihood as a function of the 2 other parameters. Okay. It's quite nasty as you can see, because here you have 2 model regions, plus the log likelihood does not vanish when you get close to the boundary of the parameter space. Okay. If you look at the model, you can see why. But still, from a purely practical point of view, in terms of optimization, it's really not the kind of function you want to have, okay? So if you start here, you get this solution. If you start here, you get this solution. You could get stuck in the, or go to infinity. It's a nightmare, essentially. So that's the first problem with state space model. In my experience, state space models generate nasty log likelihood function. By nasty, I mean maybe multimodal, evitates, things that are hard to optimize. The second problem is that what are we looking at? Because in state space model, you're not able to compute the log likelihood. So to get this plot, what I had to do is to run a special version of particle filters, which is based on Quasi-Monte Carlo. I won't have time to cover that. I do a super fine grid, and I have a large number of particles and big computers. And it's a very precise, very accurate estimate of the likelihood function. But it's not, if you really look closely, there's some numerical artifacts, okay? So maximum likelihood estimation in this model is a very challenging problem, because first, the true function is like that. And second, you don't even see the true function. You just have access to a noisy version of it. So there are different algorithms, and basically what works best maybe is the EM algorithm. But in order to do EM, you need to be able to do particle filtering and smoothing. Okay? And I'm not going to have the time to do it. Actually, my recommendation will be to be Bayesian for this kind of model, mostly because of this problem. If I look again at the... So I told you again, this is a stochastic volatility model. And yesterday I told you that for economists, econometricians, finance experts, they want to model the fact that you have a persistence in the volatility. So this rho coefficient, which maybe was phi yesterday, sorry for that, you want it to be close to 1. And the data tells you it should be close to -1. So from a modeling perspective, this is crazy. You don't want that, okay? But the data, maybe you don't have enough data. Maybe the model is not sufficiently close to reality. I don't know. At least what I see is that in this area, people use a prior to strongly favorize this region, okay? Either you like it or not, I don't know. It's debatable, but I think in many cases, you do need a prior for these models to really focus on part of a parameter space that makes sense scientifically. Okay. Anyway, so again, I'm super late, so I'm going to skip that. If you're interested, I can send you the slides. And I sent the slides to some people yesterday, but I made already a few changes. Sorry for that. Okay, so I want to cover SMC samplers for the last... no, I have 1 hour and a half left. Okay, well, I have plenty of time, that's cool. But I wanted to cover this first anyway. Okay, I'm so bad at managing time, it's depressing. Okay, so sequential Monte Carlo samplers and the waste-free version. So I told you yesterday sequential Monte Carlo samplers, I mean by this term some kind of particle filter sequential Monte Carlo algorithm which is used in another context than state space model. Essentially, you could use it to sample from one distribution or maybe a sequence of distribution. So I'm going to present you an overview of these algorithms, and I will focus on a variant we propose with Haidong Do, which we call the waste-free SMC. So Dong was doing a PhD with me, and he's now a postdoc at Oxford University. He's looking for a job, so if you want to hire someone, yeah, I mean, he's a super bright guy. It was you will. Okay, so for SMC samplers, the situation is a bit different. First, you need to design a sequence of distribution, okay? And you're going to approximate this sequence of distribution through importance sampling plus MCMC. So you could say, that's very nice, but I'm not doing time series, I don't have a sequential problem, I just have a posterior distribution, a single one I want to sample from it. What's the point of SMC then? So what you're going to do in this case, what I'm going to recommend is to design a sequence that starts from some easy distribution, maybe the prior, maybe something else, and will nicely goes toward the target distribution. You will see that the advantages of this kind of approach is that typically you have the only requirement is that you need to be able to compute the log target density. Okay. These algorithms typically tend to be easy to parallelize. We can talk about that later, especially in light of the tutorial yesterday on JAX. But basically, for the moment, just think of having n particles in parallel, and you treat them in parallel. Okay, the third point is something really nice because it's something you don't get with MCMC. You get estimate of the normalizing constants of all your targets. Okay. Adaptive, by which I mean there are several recipes that already exist and work well to choose everything for you, all the tuning parameters. So there's very little to do, and tends to be competitive to MCMC, as we try to show in various papers. Okay, so I guess few people work on this here, but it's I wanted to advertise this a little bit because I think that's super interesting. So in machine learning, some people are interested in what they call PAC Bayesian learning. So PAC is for probably approximately correct, something like that. The name is not great, but whatever. There's a super nice review by Pierre Alquier, which is on arXiv, like maybe 100 pages, and it covers everything. I really recommend it. And it is based on a pseudo-posterior. Okay, so you have some prior for a parameter theta, and here it's not a likelihood, it's exponential minus lambda, a risk function. Okay, so for instance, imagine that you want to do classification. You decided to choose some score function like that, so let's make it simple, something linear like this. So your score function is parameterized by theta. And this is obviously your risk function, is the number of points that are not properly classified, okay? Like y1 is 1, but the score is negative, or y is -1, but the score is positive. So you want the risk to be as small as possible. And so if you look at this pseudo-posterior, okay, so it depends on some lambda, but if you sample from this pseudo-posterior, you're going to sample a theta such that the likelihood is high, so the risk is low, okay? And then the question is, in this kind of procedure, well, of course, you have to decide how you design your score function, but also to choose lambda. Okay. And the obvious recommendation for me when I see this kind of method is to do SMC algorithm with lambda increasing. You start at 0. At 0, then you sample from the prior, and then you progressively increase lambda. And you don't know when to stop, okay, in this case, because again, this is a pseudo likelihood, so any value of lambda kind of makes sense or makes no sense. It's not a model. So maybe you want to choose lambda based on cross-validation, for instance. But to do cross-validation, you have to consider all these different values of lambda. And the algorithm gives you that. Okay. This kind of pseudo-posterior also arises in other contexts. So Chernozhukov tried to do the same in econometrics based on a different consideration. And also there's a Bayesian interpretation of this by Steve Walker and colleagues, where they do something like that, but they still pretend it's, or they still say it's Bayesian in a certain sense. It's a way to be Bayesian where you don't have a model. Okay. Whether you agree with this view or not, it's up to you. Read the paper. I like the paper personally, but from a computational point of view, you end up with the same situation where I guess it's not trivial to choose lambda. Another type of sequence, this time you do have a model, you do have a prior as well, and you want to consider the partial posterior. So that's the prior times the likelihood up to time t. Okay, it's normalized in this way. Okay, so it's kind of nice to be able to do sequential Bayesian inference, at least in certain situations. I guess you can see some use of that. But also, you might want to be able to compute this guy, the marginal likelihood, recursively as well. Okay. And the only way I know to do that is through a SMC sampler that is going to target this particular sequence. Okay. And I like this. I don't see it used so much, but this kind of sequential model choice is very nice because sometimes you see at some point in time this quantity behaves completely differently because the data change in some sense. So I think it's a nice practical criterion. ABC. So in ABC, you have a Bayesian model, but you have access to the model only through a simulator. So you have this black box which you give a theta, you press a button, you get a y. Okay, and that's the only way you have access to the likelihood. And so many ABC algorithms have been proposed, but they all revolve according to this kind of pseudo posterior as well, where you have it's a joint distribution for theta and y. You have a prior, you have a likelihood of your model, and then you want to sample both of them jointly, conditional on y being at distance epsilon of y star. So y star is your actual data, and the idea is that since the only way to access the model is this black box, you push the button until you get data that are close to y star, and you look at the corresponding theta, and you keep only those theta that came with y close that are close enough to y star. Okay, so that's a very quick presentation of ABC. But again, here the problem is how to choose epsilon. It's quite clear that if you want directly to do that with a small epsilon, it's going to be difficult. If you do accept-reject, for instance, you're going to have a very small acceptance probability. So you could introduce a decreasing sequence of epsilon. And you could even take epsilon 0 to be infinite if you want. Okay? And then pi 0 will be this kind of prior. Okay? By the way, I'm talking about ABC. More generally, in applied mathematics, there is a problem of rare event simulation, and you could consider exactly the same problem. Like you have some base measure, times an indicator function, and you consider smaller and smaller and smaller sets, okay? Your actual set of interest is already very small, but you start from something large and then you zoom, okay? Tampering. So tampering is the idea of interpolating between pi, your distribution of interest, and mu, some base distribution, which is easy to sample from directly. So for a given lambda, the tampering, you take mu for 1 minus lambda, and you put lambda here for pi, okay? So clearly, if I take lambda to be 0, you recover mu, and then if I increase progressive lambda to 1, I go to pi, okay? If you take the log, it's just a linear interpolation, okay? And I can rewrite this like this. So here I decided to define the normalizing constant, okay? It's mu times exponential minus lambda v if I define v to be minus log of pi over mu, okay? So this kind of tampering distribution has been around for a long time. You find it also in parallel tampering. And here you could consider, so instead of taking any value of lambda between 0 and 1, you take a grid of lambda values, and your sequence of pi t will be pi of lambda t, okay? Okay, so at time 0, you will start from mu, you will sample from the prior, and then progressively, you will go to the target, and we stop at time when lambda is 1. That's the plot I already showed yesterday, okay? But your pi is this black line, which is like a mixture of two Gaussian, and your base distribution is this Gaussian, and then you're going to sample first from this one and progressively sample from all this intermediate distribution until you reach that one. Okay. I will have a separate chapter on tampering because we have this recent paper on arXiv with Francesca and Anna Corba, which I will discuss later. But very quickly, it's super important in this kind of tampering approach to choose the lambda t's in automatic fashion based on some criterion. Okay, I will show you why. If you do it manually, you get terrible results. If you do some recipe I can tell you about, you get excellent results. So it's really that important. And also something I will explain in the next chapter, but I kept this. If you take two Gaussians in dimension d, not the same Gaussian, like normal 0, 1 power d, and you want to go to normal 0, 1/10 power d, okay? If you look at their chi-square distance, you will see it's exponential in d, okay? Again, the chi-square distance is relevant for importance sampling. Essentially, when you do importance sampling, one criterion is VSS, which essentially is some transformation of variance of the weights, and the variance of the weights is the chi-square distance. So from a practical point of view, doing importance sampling from a Gaussian to Gaussian is a bad idea and is exponentially bad in the dimension. We knew that already. But if you allow me to introduce intermediate distribution, okay, between the two, well, I can show that I need only square root of the intermediate distribution, which will also be Gaussians, so that the chi-square distance between two successive distributions is this time tau of 1. Okay, so that's in one slide why tampering is so interesting. You kind of break the curse of dimensionality. With importance sampling, it was hopeless, and now you just need square root of the intermediate distribution. Of course, this is a very simplified scenario. Here I'm looking at Gaussians, and I'm not explaining exactly how I sample from the different pi t's, okay? But at least there's hope here that the algorithm may scale very well with respect to the dimension. I will give you a more general understanding of this in the next chapter anyway. Last application, optimization. Well, I take the same sequence, but I don't stop at 1, I stop at infinity. Okay, so it's this time when lambda goes to infinity, this distribution is going to converge to the minimizers of V. Right? I hope it's okay. It's right. It's minus, so it's minimizer. Okay. So for non-trivial global optimization problems where you have multimodality, this kind of approach could also work. For instance, here in statistics, we have a variable selection problem. Then theta is a binary vector, and v theta will be BIC, for instance, or maybe the marginal log likelihood of a choice of variable, etc., etc. Could do something like that. And then you get an algorithm which is not so far from genetic programming, which was all the craze in the 80s, maybe. But, I mean, I think it was, I was young. It was a good time. Anyway. Okay, so at this stage, you could have missed all the other parts of this lecture. I just need you to know that I want to approximate a certain sequence of distribution pi t. To make my life simple, all these pi t are defined with respect to the same space. Okay? And naively, what I could do is a sequential importance sampling. Okay? I could sample theta n from the prior for pi 0. Sorry, it's not the prior, the first distribution, I mean. I have no idea what I put equal mu of theta here, but so I just sample from pi. It's just any sequence, and you sample from pi naught. Then to progress to pi 1, I'm lazy. I don't want to draw new particles, so I'm just going to reweight them according to pi 1 over pi naught. Then it goes well, so let's go to time 2 and just update the weight, multiply by pi 2 over pi 1. Okay. But of course, if you do that, pi 2 divided by pi 1 times pi 1 divided by pi 0, I'm just doing importance sampling from with a proposal pi naught and target pi 2. And recursively, at time t, I'm just doing importance sampling from pi naught to pi t. In the end, it's going to collapse, okay? Because again, typically this sequence will be such that maybe you're close at the beginning, but you go farther and farther and farther. Okay, so this is sequential importance sampling. It's too naive. So what we are going to do, sequential Monte Carlo, you already know what we want to do. We are going to resample, and then we are going to move the particles according to a certain kernel. Okay, so at time t-1, I already have a weighted set of, I have weighted particles, and I use my weighted particles in this way. Capital W, as always, are the normalized weights. To go to, before going to time t, I'm going to resample, draw a replacement according to the probabilities given by the weight. And so the important novel idea, or maybe people could disagree with that, but one important idea here is that I can apply a kernel which is just a MCMC kernel, which is going to leave pi t-1 invariant. So here I'm just using your intuition. Based on your intuition, you had a weighted sample that approximated pi t-1. And intuitively, when you resample, you're still targeting pi t-1. And if you move your particles while leaving pi t-1 invariant, you still have a cloud of particles, which give you some empirical measure that is still close to pi t-1. Okay, so this operation, it looks like you keep the current target, but with the advantage of resampling, so killing the particles with a low weight, and doing this MCMC steps is going to reintroduce novelty between the particles, or to decorrelate the particles. Okay, so that's the algorithm, but that's the same algorithm as always, except that this time my particles are called theta t n instead of xtn. Okay, and you can notice the GT function is particular, it's just pi t over pi t-1, and this Markov kernel empty it has the constraint that it has to live invariant pi t minus 1. But otherwise, it's exactly the same structure. You could, I mean, I think it will be a pointless exercise to do that today, but I could write down this QT distribution, and you will realize that the marginal of the last component will be pi t. Okay, so we don't really care about trajectories in this context of SMC samplers. Okay, I'm being very practical here. I hope that's okay. I just wanted to emphasize some important points that are a bit overlooked, maybe. You could, for the MCMC kernel, you could do different things, but by default, let's consider random walk metropolis. Okay? So in random walk metropolis, if you give me a theta, I propose a theta p, which is theta plus some Gaussian perturbation, and then I accept with probability a mean of 1 on alpha, where alpha is this ratio of pi of theta. Okay? That's we'll leave. So that's slide just describe random walk metropolis some target pi. So in your case, I'm going to do just that here, but pi replaced by pi t minus 1. Okay? But then the question is, how do you choose sigma? Okay? I guess many of you have heard about this kind of result that if your target is close to a Gaussian with a covariance S, it is recommended to take a sigma proportional to S with a certain constant C, which is this magic number divided by the dimension. Is some recipe which is based on theory that tells you that you get the optimal scaling and the optimal acceptance probability, blah, blah, blah. Okay? So, believe me, and other people have worked on this. But what is nice in the context of sequential Monte Carlo algorithms that carry forward the population of particles, is that your target pi, you already have a cloud of particles that approximate it. In particular, for S, I just can take the empirical covariance of the matrices. So that's what I would recommend. This is very basic recipe, but again, I take the time to explain it, because if you don't do that, you get terrible performance. If you get that, it's getting really, really good. Okay, and I know why I know is because I have this course at VNSER where I teach SMC, and before my package was released on GitHub, the students will implement the algorithms, but they will not do that because it was a bit more work, and they would go back and say, oh, the algorithm works poorly, etc. When I released my package, I told them, you should use my package, it's less work for you, I'm happy with that, and in return, report if you have any problem, etc. And this is automatically done for them. And then immediately, the performance went much, much, much better. Okay? So this is one obvious advantage of SMC samplers, but you should take this into account. You have a cloud of particles that tell you a lot of things of the current geometry of the target. You should use it to calibrate your MCMC kernel. And that's in contrast with a single MCMC chain, where you can try to do that in the spirit of adaptive MCMC, but it's much less robust because you're less sure that you have explored everything. Okay? So in this kind of adaptation in the context of particular algorithm is, I believe, much more robust. I'm happy to discuss if you disagree, but honestly, it's my experience that it really helps. Okay, so you take this sigma to be proportional with using this magical constant from Gareth Roberts and his papers times the empirical covariance matrix of the weighted particles. Okay. All right. Yes, but so there's one point I'm glossing over here, is this guy. There should be a S, no? K steps of, sorry. So when I say I wanted to move my particles according to MCMC kernel, I just say I'm going to do random walk metropolis. But I'm going to do 1 step, 10 step, 2,000. Okay, so I have to choose this K. And for a long time, I took it to a small number. And then I realized more recently, working on this, that it was a stupid idea. So k is also a tuning parameter, and setting k properly is actually a bit challenging. And this talk today, this chapter, the wasteless SMC, is mostly about that. So to show you, so this is based on, this is taken from the book. So that the target is the posterior of the logistic regression model. The SONAR dataset has like 50 dimensions. It's not PIMA. It's a bit more challenging than PIMA. Because PIMA dataset is a famous dataset with only 10 variables, which is a bit trivial for this kind of problem. I'm comparing the tampering sequence on IBIS. So in both cases, you have two SMC samplers. Both cases, I use these automatic strategies I told you about for the random walk metropolis. And this is the value of k, okay? So when I increase k, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, the box plots get smaller and smaller. Again, this is based on repeated runs. And I'm looking at the expectation of the first component. Okay? So increasing k gives you better results. But you could say, yes, but when you do that, you also increase the CPU cost. So what is the trade-off? But first, before I tell you, look, I start at 10. I'm not showing 1 to 10. It's terrible. I mean, 1, 2, it's all over the place. Okay, it's so you can if you take it too small, it could really get very variable. I promise we could estimate the log. It's the log marginal likelihood. So here you go. And so for this data set and this experiment, you can see that tampering works better. And if you take k equals 50 here, you get almost, not exact, but the accuracy is very, very high here. Of course, this plot already tells you the problem. I mean, how do I choose k? Let's try many different values of k, and let's choose based on plots. And nobody has time for that. It's not fun. So this plot tries to represent this trade-off I told you about. It's from the book. I'm really ashamed of it now. Because it is the variance times the number of MCMC steps. So this quantity is like trying to be a figure of merit, like finding the best trade-off, because you want to minimize this quantity, right? If you multiply k by 10, it's 10 times more expensive. If the variance does not decrease by 10, you're wasting time. You have a k that is high enough. And so that's for tampering, the black line, and this is for IBIS, and you can see it does not go up again. That's really stupid of me. I should have said, oh no, it's bad. Let's not stop at 60. I should go on and do a nice plot where you have minimum. I don't know what was going in my head when I did this plot and I put it in the book. So anyway, maybe if I did mistakes, it shows that choosing k is non-trivial, and by default you tend to choose too small values. Okay, I'm not the only one, but no, I know better. So how do we choose k in practice? Should we take k to the same value at all iteration? There's no reason to believe it's the case. And if you decide to k very large, it looks a bit wasteful, because it means that you resample your particles, you do 200 steps, and then you keep only the final particles, okay? So this wasteless SMC algorithm I'm going to present, try to avoid that and try to keep all the intermediate states. So what we're going to do instead, so let's still call capital L the number of particles, and let's take m and p to integers such that the product is n. So for instance, you want 10,000 particles, and you're going to take m and p to be 100. And you're going to resample only 100 particles. And for each particle, you're going to apply p minus 1 MCMC step, and you're going to keep all these intermediate steps. Okay? So you see the regime is a bit different. First you resample only a small fraction of the particles, And second, when you do this MCM steps, you keep everyone. Okay? So you end up again with n particles because m times p is n again. And there's no waste. So you have like m chains, and the chains are for length p because you also include the m resample particle before they are moved. So you have 0 step, 1 step, and p minus 1 steps. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, so is it valid? The paper is published, so let's say yes. And how do you choose m and p for a given n? That's two questions. So if you fix p in this, if you fix this p, the length of the chain, and you take m goes to infinity, that's one way to analyze the algorithm. You can prove that this algorithm is equivalent to a standard SMC samplers where you will have extended target at time t, which would be pi t times the kernel p minus 1 times. So that means your target is the distribution of chains of length p, where the first step follows pi t, and then you move successively the states. Okay. That's nice. It gives you a convergence as n goes to infinity, because if m goes to infinity, capital N goes to infinity. And it also gives you a nice proof that your normalizing constant estimates are still unbiased. Yes, because I forgot to say SMC samplers give you estimate of the normalizing constants, and these estimates are unbiased. Their expectation is the correct value. But it's not the regime we recommend in practice. What we recommend is instead do the opposite. You keep m fixed and you take p goes to infinity. Or alternatively, you have m and p that grow together, but m has to grow a bit slower than n. So if capital N is still your number of particles, you can take square root of n, for instance. Okay. N power alpha, more generally, okay, for certain values of alpha. So if you do that, you have this central limit theorem we established in the paper. So it looks a bit complicated, but look at this one. So at time t, this is your expectation under pi t. This is your estimate. That's the error you have. Then you have a standard central limit theorem that tells you the error is order 1 over square root of n. And this variance, if you look into it, it's so this operator. It's based on this operator. So if you know a bit about importance sampling, you can see it's this looks like you're doing importance sampling, and the base variance is this one, tilde. And this one is actually easy to understand. It's the same variance you obtain when you do MCMC. Okay? So at time t, you have a Markov kernel MT. And if you would sample from long chains from this Markov kernel, you get a certain asymptotic variance which will have this expression. Okay? That's exactly the one you get. Is it so surprising? No, because I'm in a regime when I take p goes to infinity. So I resample and I do long chains. So I'm in the long chain regime essentially. But it's a bit surprising maybe to those of you who were familiar with central limit theorem for SMC, because here it's super simple and these variances do not depend on time t-1, t-2. It's like we forget the past, okay, because of this different asymptotic regime. It's like you just sample from in many parallel long chains, essentially. So please notice, you get this asymptotic result, even assuming m is fixed. So the notation, sorry, it's a bit confusing. You have the kernel mt-1, but this m is just a number. But the referee will complain about it, but we didn't change that, so screw that. Anyway, so please notice here I can have m fixed So it's like a constant. So you could expect m to appear in the asymptotic variance. It does not. Okay? Also, as I said, it does not depend on previous iteration. So what I will get from this in practice is the algorithm is going to be much more robust on the choice of m and p. Okay? It does not matter exactly how you set them, you get the same asymptotic variance, which is very nice. And again, you interpret your n particles essentially in this regime as m independent stationary chain of LAFP. Because they behave like they were already started from the true distribution. They're already at stationarity. Okay? So you get essentially, yes, it's like you get no burn-in for free. That's one way to put it. And also practically, there is a literature on estimating the variance of MC-MC chains, and we can adapt it to get estimates based on a single run of the algorithm. That's very nice because one maybe drawback of SMC samplers is the only way to really assess their performance is to run it several times to check the variability. Okay, but here you have an estimate based on a single run. Okay, so in practice we do recommend to take m really small compared to n. You still need to take m larger than number of cores on a parallel machine if you want to parallelize, okay? Because if you think about it, because I reintroduce long chains, which means loops, it's harder to parallelize over loops. It's impossible actually, but you can still parallelize over this m chain, okay? And then we have this single run variance estimates, which is very nice. So, numerical experiments. I forgot to do any break, I'm sorry. Let's finish this. And, so again, the target is going to be the posterior of a logistic regression. The SONAR dataset, which is dimension 63, and also there's strong correlation between the covariates, if I remember correctly. Let's do the tampering sequence. And I'm going to use the random walk metropolis steps, which are automatically calibrated. And I'm going to compare standard SMC, where I have the liberty of choosing K, and waste-free SMC, where I have the liberty of choosing M. But to make a fair comparison, I'm going to take, in the first case, N like this. Okay, so when I increase K, I decrease the number of particles. And for waste-free SMC, I keep N fixed, but increasing M will decrease P. So in the end, you can check the number of evaluation of target density will essentially be the same. Okay. So it's a fair comparison. The running time is very close. And here you see, as promised, on the left we have waste-free. Whatever value of M, you get the same level of performance, essentially. Of course, I'm not going to do something crazy like M equal 1 or M equal 10,000, but something in between, same performance. Whereas when I choose K, here, for too small, it's bad. And if I take it too large, it's getting bad again. Why is it in this case that you get worse performance when you increase K? Remember that this time, I decrease the number of particles when I increase K, okay? So you have to pay the price. So I'm trying to match CPU time. So it looks here, if you're interested in the means of all the marginals, that if you want to do a standard SMC, you could get the same level of performance by taking K to be 100. But I know that because I tried all these different values, so that's already like cheating, and this looks better. And look at this one. So this time the log marginal likelihood. Again, here is very robust for waste-free SMC. For standard SMC, it looks this is biased, and I don't really understand why. So if you look at this plot, you would recommend instead to take K to be 500 maybe. Okay, so something really fishy going on with standard SMC here. It's really difficult to calibrate this K. Okay. So maybe it's an artifact, and maybe if you take the number of particles 10 times larger, this artifact will disappear, etc., etc. But why bother? Let's do what is on the left instead. Okay, waste-free, which looks much more robust to this choice of M. And that's the behavior for the variance estimate. So it's here on a repeated run. It's pretty good. Actually, this plot is difficult to understand if you don't work on this, but essentially we have no real competitor to compare to here. So this is the algorithm by Lee and Watley, and it works poorly. And this is based on, well, anyway, have a look at the paper. Let me just say the variance estimator works well. This is different and pretty fun too. This is a Latin square. You know Latin square, you try to put the numbers 1 to k in a k by k matrix in such a way that each number appears only once on each row and each column. Okay. And one interesting question is how many Latin square of size d you can make. One way to answer this question is like this. So let's define theta to be a matrix with integers. And I will constrain already theta to be such that on each row you have a permutation of d numbers. Okay? So theta already fulfills one of the constraints, the one for the rows. And v is going to be a score function that depends on the columns. Okay? So if I take pi 0, I get the prior, and the prior will respect the constraint on the columns, but not on the row. And if I take lambda goes to infinity, this will go to a discrete distribution over the Latin squares, okay? Because then the only theta such that v is goes such that the density is not 0 is such that v of theta is 0. Okay, so yeah, not super clear. So let me re-explain. V theta is positive and is 0 if and only if theta is a Latin square. Okay. So if you take lambda that goes to infinity, the normalizing constant here, so again it's a discrete probability, so the normalizing constant will be up to a constant, if, no, it will be exactly the number of Latin squares. Okay. So if I use this kind of sequence, doing tampering, and can use it to estimate the normalizing constant at any t, and for t high enough, I'm going to estimate this number of Latin squares. Okay. For the MCMC kernel, I cannot do Gaussian random walk because again, my space of thetas is just a matrices of integers. So I do a metropolis step where I take two entries randomly and I try to swap them. So two entries means two different rows and two columns. And when you swap them, and you accept reject according to this pi-t distribution. Okay, and you still see it works quite well for waste-free, whatever m. This time it looks a bit better to take m to be 50. But look at how you choose k. And for too small k, it's terribly biased. I mean, it's the log, so, but it's very far away. Okay, so you need to k quite large. And what is interesting in this example, so this is the metropolis acceptance rate at each iteration. Clearly, it goes to 0, okay? And yet, the algorithm works. So why is it going to get to 0? Because when I increase lambda, I make the constraint on the column stronger and stronger. So when I try to swap two entries, it's less and less likely I will accept. At some point, if you take a Latin square, it becomes very, if you try to swap two entries, you will not get another Latin square. So it's really interesting to see that the problem, if you will take lambda large, immediately will become impossible. Doing MCMC will be too difficult. But doing tampering, and despite the fact that your MCMC kernel at every time t, the performance gets worse and worse, you still get a decent result. Okay, so that's pretty nice. So in the paper, we have a third example for computing this kind of probability when x is a Gaussian vector. and we use different MCMC strategies. The point was to show that our general approach is not tied to a specific type of MCMC kernel. Okay, and you get again the same results. So to conclude, I really recommend by default, if you want to do a standardized, if you want to do SMC samplers, to use the weight-free variant. You get the same advantages. The algorithm is almost completely automatic. Once you have chosen a certain sequence of distribution, so you get estimate the normalizing constant. It's still parallel. You can still make it parallel. But you get this extra point, which was, I think, the remaining pain point of SMC samplers, the choice of K. Okay, that's a problem I overlooked for a long time. I mean, I need to check, but yeah, I even have this paper where we recommend, we compare many different algorithms, including SMC samplers, and we took K equal 3. And I'm pretty sure because of that, the results are a bit rubbish. So I won't do that anymore. I will just use weight-free. That will solve this problem. And we get the single realm variance estimators. If you want to try this and you have no particular preference on the sequence, and in particular you have a single target, by default I would recommend tampering because it works very well, again, if you do this automatic thing. You have implementation, so I'm going to describe later the package I told you about, but it also been implemented in Blackjacks by Adrien Corenflo. Maybe someday in Stan, but I don't, that's all brief. The paper was published in GRSSB. So let's make a break now, and I will have a separate chapter trying to explain what's so nice about tampering SMC. Let's resume. This is a completely new chapter for you guys. It's based on a paper that is on archive since a few days ago with Francesca, who is in the room, and Anna Corba, a colleague at ENSA where I work. So Anna is an expert and he works on stuff like entropic mirror descent, and Francesca and I were talking with Anna, realized there were some interesting connection between tampering SMC, tampering in general, and entropic mirror descent. It gives us a better understanding of these algorithms. Okay? So again, assume you have two distributions, mu and pi. Pi is your target. Mu is some base distribution which is easy to sample from. And you take this pi intermediate distribution, which is pi of lambda, which is obtained by taking mu power 1 minus lambda on pi power lambda. Okay? So as I told you, you could take the log, and up to a constant, it will be a linear interpolation between the two. Okay? Otherwise, I can also rewrite this as mu times exponential of log pi of mu. So let's define v like that, minus log of pi over mu, and you get this. Okay? But when I write it in this way, so I have a family of distribution for theta with some parameter lambda. So let's call it a parametric model. The parameter is between 0 and 1. And actually, this parametric model is also an exponential model. Okay, if you know about exponential families, it's because here you have the only factor where you have an interaction between theta and lambda is of form exponential, a function of lambda times a function of theta. It's even in natural form if you know about this. All right, so it's a parametric model, so I can define the Fisher information. You know, this stuff we see in Statistic 101, which is, because it's an exponential model, you can check it's going to be the variance of v of theta when theta follows the distribution pi of lambda. Okay. What's the point of the Fisher information? I don't know if you remember because it's not something we use so much in Bayesian statistics. The Fisher information is like a local measure of the ability of a model to discern between two values of lambda. Okay? So if you don't see what I mean, look at this kind of result, which we have in the paper. df here is some kind of divergence. It's called a f divergence, and you could choose different values of f. But it's defined generally as expectation under mu of f over pi over mu. F needs to be convex for this to be defined. So anyway, some kind of pseudo distance. And if I look at the pseudo distance between pi lambda and pi lambda prime, if they are close enough, you can show that this quantity will behave like the square of lambda prime minus lambda times the factor where you have the feature information. Okay? This depends on function f, but it's not really important. So this information, this Fisher information, which is just a number here, it's not a matrix because lambda is unidimensional, but this quantity tells you the local ability of your model to discern between two guys that are close enough. Okay. Is this result surprising? Look at it. If I take lambda equal lambda prime, this is a pseudo distance, so it should be 0. Okay. So that's not surprising. You get 0. First derivative. The first derivative, if you look at this, it means it's 0. Okay. And I of lambda appears like a second derivative. And that's exactly how you introduce, it depends which textbook you look at, but essentially that's how you may introduce the Fisher information is you do this for the specific case of the Kullback-Leibler for your model. Okay? So Kullback-Leibler, you recover this if you take f of x to be x log x. If you take this function, it's convex, and you get here the f divergence in Kullback-Leibler. Okay? Also, interestingly, it works for the chi-square divergence, which we already mentioned today and yesterday, if you take this f of x. All right? So for our scenario, what's the point of this? We said that in tampering, we want to choose a sequence of value of lambdas. But something reasonably intuitive would be to make them equidistant. Okay? That means that you want the divergence between pi lambda t minus 1 and pi lambda t to be some constant c. In particular, it makes sense if you consider the chi-square divergence, because the chi-square divergence is essentially tied to important sampling. So what I'm telling you is that if I do that, I want that at every time t, my important sampling step is of the same, give you the same level of variance. Okay? So I might want to do something like that. Then if I plug this, I can see that this means that lambda prime minus lambda squared times this equal a constant. So lambda t minus 1 is some constant divided by square root of the Fisher information. Okay? For the moment, it's just some theoretical consideration, right? That would be one way to choose the successive lambdas. Okay, but it's quick to check that if you're in this IID scenario, well, both mu and pi, they are distribution with respect to IID components. Okay, it's not always the case, of course, but in this case, you can quickly check that that Fisher information I define is tau of d. Let's look at the definition. You see here, I said it was the variance of v, and v is the log of this. Okay, so if you have this guy is a ratio, but if you're in the IID case, it's a product of a d factors. If I take the log, it's a sum, and I have d terms, essentially. So if I do that, you automatically get the square root of this scaling I told you about for Gaussians. So this result I told you about for Gaussian, we put it in the book because you could compute things exactly for Gaussians. But we've just realized with Francesca and Anna recently, it's much more general. As soon as you have an IID target on IID-based distribution, you have the square root of this scaling. By which I mean, if you had some scaling like that in dimension 1, for some lambdas that will show them like that, and then you would want to go to dimension d, then here that you will have square root of d. So the steps here will be square root of d smaller, so you need square root of d times more steps. Okay, so you get the square root of d automatically based on this simple consideration. The second point is that at the moment it's not so clear how this information matrix is going to behave. So in the paper we consider different cases. Let me skip that for the moment. And what I'm plotting is not exactly that, but it's essentially it's the same thing. Let's say I'm running an SMC samplers. N is the iteration number, like T in the previous chapters. Sorry for that. And here, that's the lambda you choose so as to respect this. Okay? And I have 3 different cases. In all the cases, mu and pi are Gaussian. Mu is normal with mean 0 and variance identity. Pi is normal with mean 0 and some covariance matrix, which is diagonal. So in the bigger case, on the diagonal, you have 100 everywhere. The bigger is this one. In the smaller case, you go to smaller variances. So on the diagonal, you have 10 minus 2 everywhere. And the third case, you do a mix. So half of the entries are 100 and half of them are 10 minus 2. So you see, this blue line is the most standard case you encounter. Because typically, you move from some base distribution towards the target with smaller variance. And you see that in this case, you need the lambda to increase very, very slowly at the beginning. Okay? And then at some point, it takes up speed and it goes like that. But if you will go the other way around, you will start from some distribution and will go to another distribution with a higher variance. You'll have to do the opposite. You have to be very fast at the beginning and then to slow down very. It kind of makes sense because this is like the symmetric of this one because you're going from one distribution to the next or doing the opposite path in a sense. And what is interesting is this one, which is the intermediate of the two, which you see you're forced to be slow at the beginning and at the end. Okay? Right? So this was obtained by a numerical experiment, but in the Gaussian case, you can actually compute this I of lambda exactly and solve the corresponding equations, and you get exactly the same results. Okay? So the point I'm trying to make with this kind of plot, it's hard to know beforehand how you choose the next lambdas. That's why it's so important, as I stressed out already, to find some recipe to automatically choose them. So what we do in practice is to use VSS. At every time t, you try to choose the next lambda, so the ESS of the weights is n over 2. And if you do that, it works well. But an alternative recipe will be to use an estimate of information, the Fisher information, which is very easy because, again, let me remind you the definition, is the variance of V. And V is just the log weights. By log weights here, I mean the log weight if you would do important sampling from the beginning to the end, okay? But you just have to compute the variance of V theta for your current value of lambda. So in practice, you could simply use the empirical variance based on your particles, okay, of this function v of theta, okay? And if you give me lambda t minus 1, if you replace this by the empirical variance, you can solve and get, you don't even need to solve, you get lambda t equal lambda t minus 1 plus c divided by this. So you get another recipe which will work equally well to choose the next exponent lambda t. Okay. So in this paper, we also mention this. So I'm less knowledgeable on this algorithm, so I will be quick. We reinterpret tampering SMCs as a numerical approximation of entropic mirror descent. Okay, so briefly, in optimization, you do gradient descent when you want to optimize some function. You do mirror descent when you use some dual space first and you do optimization in the dual space. And by entropic mirror descent, it means you're in a space of probability distribution and your criterion is like the Kullback-Leibler distance towards your target pi. So when you do tampering SMC, which is this essentially again, progressing from some lambda t minus 1 to lambda t in this one, it's like doing in the space of distribution a step toward pi, which is kind of locally optimal with respect to some metric, I should not say metric, maybe some functional, which will be simply Kullback-Leibler. Okay, so I'm going to shut up now because I'm pretty sure this is a very bad description of what I wanted to say. You should rather read this paper, which is on arXiv, for more detail on this. Okay. So anyway, bottom line, there's something very nice about tampering in general, because again, the best news is this scaling square root of d. Okay, that's kind of fantastic. That does not give you the actual scaling of SMC tampering, because you have to take into account the behavior of your Markov kernels. Okay, so if you're a bit familiar with the theory of MCMC, if I decide to choose a random walk metropolis, you know that the scaling of these kernels is like you need 2 of these steps to move a certain distance. Okay. Maybe I could use another MCMC kernel that will mix better, like Mala, and that will get another scaling. Okay, and then the overall scaling of algorithm will be also a function of that. Here I'm just looking at the price you pay to introduce the intermediate distribution, and if I could use perfect kernels that will sample exactly from the distribution, you need just square root of the steps. For instance, imagine a case where you just want to estimate the normalizing constant, and each pi t you can sample from it. Then you just need square root of the steps. That's very nice. It's uncommon in applied mathematics to have such a good lower than linear scaling. And also the other point I made again, it's super important you don't choose a lambda t. So in the literature, at the beginning, people tried to use a linear scale, and that makes sense only if I of lambda is constant. But typically for, so I should have this plot too, maybe I forgot, sorry. But for this standard choices of mu and pi, it's really not the case that I lambda is a linear function. It behaves like a geometric, like exponential positive or exponential negative. And that's why you get something like that. Anyway, so I had to skip a lot of things, but I like to show you something now, which is my web page. Yes. And if you go to my web page, you can click on software. And you have this pointer to this, maybe I should make it bigger. Is that big enough? Yes. To particles. So that's Python library I've been developing. At the beginning, my objective was just to do all the numerical experiment for the book. And in the end, I decided to make it publicly available and to make it useful more generally. This is the GitHub repo where you can get it. And the documentation is on Read the Doc, which is a website for documenting Python packages. So I realized yesterday night that there was a bug with this website, and you can see when you see Python code, it looks nice on the first page. But if I click here, the syntax highlighting has disappeared. So that's, if someone Read the Docs, tell me, for me, it's always a nightmare, this stuff. It compiles everything for you. Every time is a bug. And anyway, so sorry, I just discovered that yesterday. So what I'm going to show you instead is the local version of these notebooks. Because I forgot to say, so the documentation explain classically how you can install the package on the API, etc. But there are also notebooks. And I always recommend people to look at the notebooks first. These notebooks were Jupyter notebooks, which I converted into HTML essentially, okay, using tools that do that for you. So I just wanted to, no, that's not the one, okay. So can you read the code a little bit, even those in the back? Yeah, okay. Okay, so this is the name of the library. It has different modules. Let's go through them later, maybe. That's just NumPy and some Matplotlib, which are standard libraries in Python. Okay, so that's the stochastic volatility model. Okay, YT given XT is a Gaussian with variance exponential XT. XT is autoregressive, blah, blah, blah. So I can define this model in particles by defining a class. You can see that hopefully you can quickly understand. You can see this is the distribution of YT at time t given xt and maybe xt minus 1. And I say it has to be a normal with mean 0 and variance exponential of x. So scale is a standard deviation. Oh, there's a mistake. Third time I see it. It should be exponential of half x, I think. Yeah, because scale is the standard deviation. Okay, first time I see that. Anyway, px is going to define xt given xt minus 1. This is x0. Okay, so this class defines a parametric stochastic volatility model. And if I want to define a specific model with parameter values, I instantiate the class and I specify the values of the parameters. Here you can see self.mu, self.rho, that will be the parameters. Okay. Once my model object is defined, I can simulate from it. I can simulate x values and y values. So y will be the data, and I can plot it. So for the moment, it's not super powerful. I can just sample from my model. Okay, and now let's try to do particle filtering. So SMC is the main class that defines the algorithm you want to run. Okay, the arguments are quite obvious. N is the number of particles. Resampling is the kind of resampling scheme you want. This you can ignore for the moment. The only one which is a bit more mystifying is FK. So FK stands for Feynman-Cach. I need to specify the Feynman-Cach model I want to approximate. And this Feynman-Cach model, I say, oh, look, I have a certain state space model, SSM state space model. I have some data. Please define automatically for me the bootstrap Feynman-Cach model that corresponds to this. and then you pass it to this object. Okay, thank you. And then you can run it, and it will run until completion. Okay. And so you can see here I run the particle filter, and I plot the expectation, at every time t, the estimated expectation of the filtering distribution. That's the blue line. Okay, and there is some parallel processing you can do. So multi-SMCs for running SMC several times. So here I do it 30 times, and I do it using quasi-Monte Carlo, yes or no, and I compare the two. Okay. This multi-SMC is based on the fantastic JobLib library I can tell you about, which is developed by someone at INRIA who is also behind scikit-learn. So that's really neat. It does all the hard work of parallelising for you. Okay. So you can do parallel smoothing, but I've not covered that. You can do Bayesian parameter estimation. Here I define a certain prior for my parameters, normal, gamma, beta. And then I can ask to run PMMH. So it's one of the algorithms I would have covered if I had done the Bayesian chapter. And I can plot results like this, blah, 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 blah. So there are different tutorials. There's also one for SMC samplers. Let me show you. Again, here I'm defining a certain model, which I'll call a static model. There's no latent variables. So I say that yt, given the parameter, is just normal, actually. So that's the PDF, with mean mu and variance sigma. And then I can automatically define a prior, get some data, and doing either EBIS when you try to estimate recursively the partial posteriors, or you can do SMC tampering. And here, so my philosophy for the package now is always to try to provide by default what I believe to be the best option. So now it implements by default waste-free. Okay, let's explain here. And here I have also explanation. So when you run, you can see that here I compute VSS every time, but I resample and do some metropolis only at certain times based on VSS criterion, etc., etc. That is the SS across time, etc. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Just a few last remarks. So this package is implemented in standard Python. It heavily relies on NumPy. So to follow on yesterday's discussion, I also use Numba a little bit. So for certain resampling schemes to accelerate things. So as we discussed with the guys who were doing the tutorial on Charlie, Numba is much easier to use. You just have to add one line saying, oh, please accelerate this. But maybe it's not as powerful than JAX, and it does not do GPU, etc. So I'm seriously considering taking time at some point to re-implement some of this functionality of the JAX, but I've not started yet. I'm still thinking of how to do it. It's already pretty efficient. So I have this other project with colleagues in Bristol, as PhD student, to try to implement SMC sampler in R. And I say, can I try again in my package, please? And of course, it was a bit, my version was 100 faster because Python is faster than R, because I've been doing that for a long time and know all the tricks. And also you have all this automatic calibration that goes on, etc., etc. So if you need anything related to SMC samplers, it might be worth having a look at this package, try to use it. If you're stuck, you send me an email, I'm happy to help. And maybe in the end, you will be in a situation where you need to re-implement it yourself for some reason, because it's a corner case that that is not yet in the package, but still maybe, since I spent quite a lot of time on it, you might benefit from looking at what I've done and what others have done, because I must also thank various contributors like Adrien Corenflo, who may make me manage, improve things and correct things, etc., etc. And the one last thing I wanted to say about that, I was very brief because of lack of time, but you see what I'm trying to do is a bit like a very basic version of probabilistic programming. I was even invited in a colloquium at the Collège de France on probabilistic programming. I looked really stupid, I can tell you, because it's not really my field, but it's, there are very smart people working on developing computer languages that understand random variables and automatically compute posterior distribution based on prior distribution stuff. That's super interesting. So you can see that in my package, I'm already trying to do that to some extent, but I'm just using my limited skills and I'm just using Python. But still, particle filters, the way they operate, it makes it reasonably easy to do something like that. Like I showed you at the very beginning in the first tutorial, when I want to define my model, I can define my model through objects that are distribution. And then behind the curtain, there's distribution objects. They will be such that if you want to sample from it, you will call a certain method called random variable RVS for random variable simulation. When you want to compute the PDF, you have a method for that, etc. So there's something very neat about object orientation on Python. And maybe also more life is quite easy in the context of particle filters, which makes it not so hard to do, even for an non-expert myself, like doing some kind of probabilistic programming. So that's also a bit of a split. Anyway, I'm done. Thank you very much.